At exactly 7:18 p.m., a homeless pregnant woman stood beside a black luxury sedan in a hospital parking lot, shielding a tiny box from the rain instead of herself. Inside the soaked cardboard box rested a pair of worn yellow baby shoes she had bought for $4, the only gift she could still give her unborn daughter. Security guards thought she was trying to steal the car. The billionaire who owned it thought the same, until he saw what she refused to let the storm touch. Less than 15 minutes later, Travis Reed looked into the eyes of a complete stranger and quietly asked, "If you're willing to trust me, would you become my wife? Before we uncover how two broken lives collided that rainy night, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if stories about hope, kindness, and second chances mean something to you, I'd love to have you join us by subscribing for more." Long before she became the woman crying beside a stranger's car, Grace Holloway had been the kind of person most people barely noticed. Every weekday morning at 5:10 a.m., she boarded the number 147 bus on Chicago's South Side, carrying the same faded navy lunch bag and a stainless steel coffee mug with a tiny crack near the handle. She always sat in the second seat from the back because it gave her enough room to stretch her swollen feet after 12-hour shifts. Most passengers were too tired to talk, but Grace still greeted every bus driver with the same gentle smile. "Morning." Sometimes they answered. Sometimes they didn't. It never changed the way she said it the next day. Grace worked as a certified nursing assistant at Lakeshore Manor, a modest nursing home where the wallpaper had begun peeling near the elevators, and the coffee always tasted slightly burnt. The pay wasn't impressive, just over $21 an hour, but she believed caring for people mattered. She remembered birthdays. She braided elderly women's silver hair exactly the way they liked it. She shaved old men who no longer had steady hands. She sat beside lonely residents whose families stopped visiting years ago. One of them was 87-year-old Mrs. Eleanor Watkins. Every Tuesday afternoon, Grace wheeled her into the small courtyard, even during chilly weather. "My son is coming today," Eleanor would whisper with hopeful eyes. Grace knew he almost never came. Instead of correcting her, Grace simply smiled. "Then we'd better make sure you look beautiful." She would straighten Eleanor's cardigan brush, invisible lint from her shoulder, and wait with her until sunset. Sometimes no one arrived. Grace stayed anyway. "You know," Eleanor once said quietly, watching orange leaves fall from the maple trees, "people think loneliness is silence." She looked at Grace. "It isn't." Grace tilted her head. "It's when nobody expects you anymore." Those words settled somewhere deep inside her heart. Perhaps because they sounded strangely familiar. Her own life wasn't glamorous. She rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat where the washing machines rattled so loudly at night that they often became her lullaby. The kitchen sink leaked. The heating barely worked during winter. Still, she kept the apartment spotless. She bought fresh flowers every payday, usually daisies, just $5 for a small bouquet. She believed every home deserved something alive inside it. Then she met Derek Lawson. He was charming in the effortless way that made people lower their guard before realizing it. He remembered her coffee order. He opened doors. He laughed easily. Most importantly, he spoke about the future. "I want a real family someday." Grace had never heard anyone say those words with such confidence. Months passed. She trusted him. When Derek claimed his credit had been damaged by identity theft and asked if he could temporarily use her name to finance a pickup truck for work, she hesitated. "It's only paperwork," he assured her. "I'll handle every payment." He kissed her forehead. "I promise." Grace believed promises still meant something. She signed. For almost a year, nothing seemed wrong. Then the phone calls began. Unknown numbers, voicemails, collection agencies, late notices. Grace thought there had been a mistake. She drove across town looking for Derek. His apartment was empty. Neighbors said he'd left weeks earlier. His phone had been disconnected. Social media accounts disappeared one after another. Only then did she discover the truth. The truck had been sold. The loan remained, along with 3 other debts opened under her name. Nearly $93,000. She was 29 years old, pregnant, and suddenly responsible for debts she had never created. She tried everything. She contacted the police. She filed fraud reports. She hired legal aid. But investigations moved slowly while bills arrived quickly. Debt collectors didn't care who had signed in good faith. They only cared whose name appeared on the documents. Soon they began visiting Lakeshore Manor. They waited near the entrance, asked nurses questions, left business cards at reception. Families noticed. Management noticed. One afternoon, Grace was called into the administrator's office. Mr. Collins folded his hands awkwardly. "We know you haven't done anything violent." She nodded silently. "But these collectors are disturbing residents." "I understand." "We're going to have to let you go." Grace lowered her eyes, not because she was angry, because she knew arguing wouldn't save her job. She packed her locker into a cardboard box. 2 family photographs, her cracked coffee mug, a navy sweater, a notebook filled with reminders about residents' favorite songs and medications. Before leaving, Mrs. Eleanor Watkins reached for her trembling hand. "You leaving?" Grace forced a smile. "Just for a little while." The old woman slowly removed a tiny silver angel pin from her cardigan. "I've had this since 1968. Grace shook her head. "I can't take that." "You can." Eleanor closed Grace's fingers around it. "Because someday you'll remember that losing a place isn't the same as losing yourself." Grace hugged her carefully. She cried only after reaching the parking lot. Without a paycheck, everything unraveled faster than she imagined. Rent came due. Utilities followed. Her savings vanished, paying minimum loan balances she didn't truly owe. By the 7th month of pregnancy, she received an eviction notice taped to her apartment door. She packed everything she owned into her aging blue Honda Civic. The landlord wasn't cruel. He simply couldn't afford another unpaid month. For nearly 3 weeks, the car became her bedroom. She parked behind a 24-hour grocery store some nights, near a church on others. She learned which gas stations allowed customers to use restrooms without buying anything. She showered twice a week at a community recreation center. Every dollar mattered. She skipped breakfast, skipped lunch, sometimes dinner. But she never missed prenatal appointments, even if it meant walking 3 miles after running out of gasoline. One afternoon, while wandering through a small thrift store, Grace found something sitting alone on the lowest shelf. A pair of tiny yellow baby shoes. Soft leather, slightly worn, perfectly clean. The price tag read $4. She stared at them for nearly 5 minutes. $4 could buy enough canned soup for 2 days. $4 could put another gallon of gas into her car. $4 suddenly felt impossibly expensive. Then she imagined tiny feet taking their first steps. She imagined laughter echoing inside a home she no longer had. Without another word, she carried the shoes to the register. The elderly cashier smiled. "Having a little girl." Grace touched her stomach. "I hope so." Walking back to the car, she placed the shoes carefully inside an old cardboard gift box she had found behind the store. From that day forward, she carried the box everywhere. Whenever life became unbearable, she opened it just long enough to remind herself why she couldn't give up. "My baby will have a home," she whispered every night. "I don't know how, but she will." 3 days later, even that fragile routine collapsed. Grace stepped outside the public library after searching online for emergency housing assistance. The parking space where her Honda had been sitting was empty. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she noticed the bright orange towing notice taped to the curb. Expired registration. Outstanding city violations. Vehicle impounded. Everything she still owned had disappeared with that car. She tightened both arms around the small cardboard box containing the yellow baby shoes. It was now the only piece of her future she still possessed. Slowly, with nowhere left to go, Grace began walking toward the hospital district, hoping anyone might know where a pregnant woman without a home could safely spend the night. On the 43rd floor of Reed Biotech's headquarters, the city of Chicago looked impossibly small. From Travis Reed's office, traffic became silent. Streams of light, crowded sidewalks turned into moving dots, and problems seemed as distant as clouds drifting over Lake Michigan. Employees often joked that their CEO could see the entire city from his desk. What none of them understood was that Travis rarely looked out the windows anymore. The view reminded him of the day everything he had spent years building suddenly became meaningless. At exactly 8:00 every morning, his assistant placed a black coffee on the corner of his walnut desk. No sugar, no cream. It sat untouched until it went cold. By noon, another cup replaced it. That one usually went cold too. People admired Travis Reed for his discipline. He arrived before everyone else. He answered emails himself. He knew the names of factory supervisors, laboratory technicians, janitors, and receptionists. If a production line stopped at 2 a.m, he often arrived before the engineering team. Magazines called him one of America's most respected healthcare entrepreneurs. Business schools studied the company he had built. Television hosts praised his calm leadership during economic downturns. Yet every evening when the elevators emptied and the building fell silent, Travis remained alone in an office far too large for one person. He wasn't chasing another $1 billion. He simply hated going home. Years earlier, Reed Biotech had begun in a rented garage on Chicago's west side. Back then, Travis wasn't a billionaire. He was an engineer with an impossible dream and a wife who believed in him more than he believed in himself. Emily Reed had been a pediatric nurse. Warm, funny, patient enough to survive years of uncertainty beside a husband obsessed with prototypes and investors. Whenever Travis apologized for working another late night, Emily would laugh. "I'm investing too." In what? In you. She used to write tiny notes and hide them inside his laptop bag. "Remember to eat lunch. Call your mother. You are enough." Some days those little notes carried him further than any investor's encouragement ever could. The only thing they wanted more than building a successful company was becoming parents. But month after month became year after year. Doctors, specialists, hormone treatments, procedures, disappointments. They stopped announcing pregnancies from friends because each celebration quietly reopened an old wound. Still, Emily refused to lose hope. One rainy Sunday afternoon, while walking past a children's boutique, she stopped in front of the display window. Tiny shoes lined the shelves in every imaginable color. She smiled and pointed toward a bright yellow pair. "When we finally have our baby," she whispered, "I'm buying yellow shoes." Travis laughed. "Why yellow?" "Because yellow means hope." He squeezed her hand. "Then we'll buy the brightest yellow shoes in Chicago." After 7 years of trying, the miracle finally arrived. Emily was pregnant. Neither of them told anyone during the first months. They were too afraid. Every doctor's appointment felt like crossing another fragile bridge. At 12 weeks, they heard the heartbeat. At 20 weeks, they painted a nursery. Emily insisted on leaving one wall blank. "We'll let our child draw on it someday." At 28 weeks, Travis found a pair of tiny yellow baby shoes. He bought them without telling Emily. He planned to surprise her after his board meeting the following Friday. Instead, Friday became the day his entire world collapsed. An overseas investment group had flown into Chicago. The meeting couldn't be postponed. Emily kissed him before he left. "I'll be fine. Call me if anything feels wrong. I promise." Halfway through the presentation, Travis silenced his vibrating phone. Then again, and again. When the meeting finally ended, there were 12 missed calls, 3 from Emily, 9 from the hospital. By the time he arrived, doctors had already done everything they could. Complications had come without warning. Their daughter never survived delivery. Emily lived only long enough to whisper a few final words. A nurse later repeated them to Travis because he had arrived too late to hear them himself. "Tell him," the nurse struggled to keep her voice steady. "Tell him no mother should ever feel alone." For years afterward, Travis replayed that sentence every night. He convinced himself she hadn't been talking about herself. She had been thinking about other women, even while dying. That was exactly who Emily had always been. Her kindness had remained larger than her suffering. The nursery stayed untouched. The yellow baby shoes remained inside their box. Travis couldn't bring himself to throw them away. He couldn't bear to look at them either. So he locked the box inside a cedar chest in the attic of the house and never opened it again. Instead, he buried himself in work. Reed Biotech expanded across the country. Factories multiplied, research centers opened, hospitals signed contracts. His fortune grew beyond anything he had once imagined. Success became easier than healing. When reporters asked why he never remarried, he always smiled politely. "My work keeps me busy." It was only half true. The other half lived inside a house where every room echoed with memories. Even the dining table remained set for 2. Every Sunday evening, he still caught himself looking toward Emily's empty chair before remembering she would never sit there again. Only one person spoke honestly to him anymore. Daniel Brooks, his attorney, his oldest friend. The man who had watched Travis build both a company and a life before watching him lose half of it. That Tuesday afternoon, Daniel entered the office carrying a thick leather folder. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know. You ignored my calls. I was in meetings." Daniel sighed. "You've been in meetings for 10 years. He placed the folder on Travis's desk. "This can't wait any longer." Inside lay the final legal documents connected to Samuel Reed's estate. Travis's father had died 18 months earlier. A disciplined businessman from another generation, Samuel had admired success but valued family even more. His final will contained one condition almost everyone considered unusual: control of the Reed Family Foundation, the charitable organization holding nearly $2 billion dedicated to maternal health and children's hospitals, would transfer to Travis only if he established a legally recognized family before the deadline. Otherwise, the foundation would be handed to an external board permanently. At first, Travis had dismissed the condition as emotional manipulation from beyond the grave. Now the deadline was only 26 days away. Daniel folded his arms. "You've spent 10 years saving companies." He looked directly into his friend's tired eyes. "But you've spent the same 10 years refusing to save yourself." Travis stared silently at the city below. Finally, he spoke. "I'm not afraid of losing the foundation." "No. I'm afraid of pretending I know how to have a family again." Outside the office windows, dark clouds slowly gathered over Chicago, carrying the first cold rain of October toward a hospital parking lot where, before the day was over, a homeless pregnant woman carrying a cardboard box would unknowingly change the direction of his life. By the time Grace reached the hospital district, the sky had turned the color of wet concrete. A sharp October wind swept through downtown Chicago, carrying the smell of rain and fallen leaves. She pulled the zipper of her thin gray hoodie as high as it would go, but it did little to stop the cold from settling into her shoulders. Her back ached from hours of walking. Every few minutes she paused to support the weight of her 8-month pregnancy before forcing herself to continue. She had only one destination left: St. Catherine Medical Center. Not because she was sick, because hospitals always knew something. Someone inside might know a shelter with an empty bed. Someone might hand her a phone number that hadn't already been crossed off her list. Hope she had learned sometimes looked as small as a receptionist willing to make one extra phone call. Inside the emergency department lobby, the air smelled of disinfectant and fresh coffee. Families hurried past. Doctors disappeared behind swinging doors. Children cried. Televisions quietly displayed weather forecasts predicting freezing rain overnight. Grace waited nearly 40 minutes before speaking with a social worker. The woman behind the desk looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. Stacks of paperwork covered every available surface. "I'm sorry," the social worker said gently after checking her computer for several minutes. "I've called every maternity shelter within 30 miles. Grace remained silent. "They're all full." "What about churches?" "Most emergency church programs ended last week." Grace nodded once. She wasn't angry. The woman had tried. "I appreciate you checking." The social worker reached into a cabinet and handed her 2 peanut butter crackers, a bottle of water, and a folded blanket no thicker than a bath towel. "I wish I had better news." Grace accepted them with both hands. "You've already been kind?" Those words lingered with the social worker long after Grace quietly walked away. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, they became a steady curtain bouncing off sidewalks and turning parking lots into shimmering mirrors beneath the streetlights. Grace unfolded the blanket over her shoulders, but the cardboard box remained exposed. She quickly tucked it beneath her coat. The yellow baby shoes had stayed dry for weeks. She wasn't about to let rain ruin them now. She wandered toward the employee parking structure, searching for any place that offered a little shelter. Near the executive parking area stood a concrete overhang extending just far enough to keep one section of pavement dry. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Grace lowered herself carefully onto the curb, leaning against a thick support column. She rested one hand on her stomach. The baby kicked softly. She smiled despite everything. "I know. I'm trying." The movement beneath her palm reminded her she wasn't alone. She opened the cardboard box for only a second. The tiny yellow shoes looked almost cheerful against the gray evening. "They're still waiting for you." A tear landed beside them. She wiped it away immediately before it could stain the leather. Several expensive vehicles occupied the nearby reserved spaces. Grace deliberately kept her eyes lowered. She had learned that looking too long at luxury cars often made security guards suspicious. She wanted to be invisible. Unfortunately, invisibility rarely lasted. A flashlight beam suddenly swept across the pavement. "There she is." 2 uniformed security officers approached quickly. One was middle-aged with tired eyes. The other appeared much younger, perhaps, only a few years out of the academy. The younger guard spoke first. "Ma'am, you can't stay here." Grace slowly stood. "I understand. I'm just waiting for the rain to ease up. This area is reserved. I'll leave as soon as it slows down." The older guard noticed her pregnancy and softened slightly. "Do you have someone coming to pick you up?" Grace hesitated. "No." "A car?" She looked towards the ground. "No." The younger officer glanced toward the black sedan parked only a few feet away. Its polished finish reflected the rain like black glass. "This isn't your vehicle." "No." "What are you doing standing next to it?" Grace tightened her grip on the cardboard box. "Trying to keep this dry." The young guard frowned. "What's inside?" She instinctively pulled the box closer. "It's personal." His expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to open it." Before Grace could answer, another vehicle entered the parking area. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop nearby. Its headlights illuminated the rain like thousands of tiny silver needles. The driver stepped out first, holding an umbrella. He hurried toward the rear passenger door. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat emerged. Even from a distance, his posture carried quiet authority. The guards straightened immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Reed." Travis Reed acknowledged them with a brief nod before reaching for the umbrella himself. He had just finished visiting the neonatal intensive care unit where Reed Biotech had funded new respiratory equipment earlier that afternoon. Hospital visits usually left him emotionally drained. Seeing newborns always reminded him of everything he had lost. He was only a few steps from his sedan when he noticed the woman standing beside it. Her clothes were soaked. Rain dripped from loose strands of her hair. One arm cradled a worn cardboard box against her chest, as though it contained something priceless. The younger security guard spoke quickly. "We found her lingering around your vehicle. We're asking her to move." Travis studied Grace quietly. She never once looked at the car. She wasn't examining the door handles. She wasn't checking the windows. She wasn't behaving like someone interested in stealing anything. Instead, every ounce of her attention remained fixed on protecting the small box beneath her coat. Then a strong gust of wind tore through the parking lot. The cardboard slipped from Grace's wet hands. "No." She reached for it. Too late. The box struck the pavement. Its lid opened. A tiny pair of yellow baby shoes slid onto the wet concrete. Grace dropped to her knees without thinking. She ignored the rain soaking her clothes, ignored the mud staining her jeans, ignored the pain shooting through her back. Her trembling hands carefully lifted the little shoes before the puddles could reach them. She gently wiped away a single drop of water with the sleeve of her hoodie. Only after the shoes were safe did she notice everyone watching. The parking lot fell strangely silent. Travis stared at the tiny shoes. Yellow. His breathing caught for the briefest moment. For an instant, another pair of yellow baby shoes hidden for 10 years inside a cedar chest flashed through his memory. The resemblance struck him like an unexpected wave. Grace slowly placed the shoes back inside the box. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not looking at anyone. "I wasn't trying to bother anybody." "I just needed somewhere dry for a few minutes." She turned to leave. After only 2 steps, dizziness overtook her. The world tilted. Her knees weakened. Before she could fall, Travis moved instinctively, reaching out just in time to steady her arm. For the first time, their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Then Travis asked the simplest question anyone had offered her in days. "When was the last time you had something to eat?" Grace didn't answer immediately. She wasn't embarrassed by the question. She simply had to think. Time had become strangely blurred over the past few weeks. Days were measured by shelter waiting lists, bus routes, and doctor's appointments rather than calendars. Finally, she looked at Travis. "I had 2 peanut butter crackers about 3 hours ago." Her voice was calm, matter of fact, as though surviving on crackers was something ordinary. Travis glanced towards the unopened bottle of water tucked beneath her arm. "Before that," Grace hesitated. "I don't remember." The silence that followed said enough. One of the security guards quietly looked away. The younger officer suddenly seemed ashamed of how suspicious he had been only moments earlier. Travis removed his overcoat and draped it gently across Grace's shoulders. She instinctively started to hand it back. "You'll be cold." "So will you." "I'll manage." She shook her head. "I can't take your coat." "It isn't a gift." He gave a small nod towards the hospital entrance. "It's a loan until we get inside." For a moment, Grace considered refusing again. Accepting kindness had become difficult. Too many people offered help only to expect something in return. She had learned that lesson painfully. Still, the cold wind was growing stronger. She reluctantly slipped her arms into the oversized coat. It carried the faint scent of cedarwood and coffee. The warmth almost made her cry. Travis gestured toward the hospital cafe. "Would you have dinner with me?" Grace looked confused. "I don't have any money." "I wasn't asking you to pay." "I can't promise I'll be interesting company." A faint smile touched the corner of Travis's mouth. I'm not looking for interesting. The cafe was nearly empty. It was just after 7:30, long after the dinner rush. A cashier recognized Travis immediately and tried to refuse payment. He quietly insisted. Everyone pays. 5 minutes later, they sat across from one another at a small table near the window. Grace stared at the bowl of chicken noodle soup in front of her. Steam curled into the air. Fresh bread rested beside it. She didn't touch either. Aren't you hungry? Travis asked. I am. She folded her hands. It's just... What? I always wait a minute. Why? In case someone else needs it more. Travis blinked. What do you mean? She glanced around the room. When you've spent enough time without food, you notice other hungry people. If someone walked in right now looking worse than me, she shrugged gently, I'd probably give it to them. Travis looked down at his untouched sandwich. For years, business dinners had filled his calendar. Expensive restaurants, private clubs, luxury hotels. He had watched executives argue over million-dollar contracts while leaving half their meals untouched. Across from him sat a woman who had almost nothing. Yet her first instinct was still to think about someone else's empty stomach. Please, he said softly. Eat. Grace nodded. She whispered a quiet prayer beneath her breath before lifting the spoon. The first bite seemed almost painful. Warmth spread through her body. She closed her eyes for just a second. This is really good. It's only soup? She smiled. When you've been hungry, she paused. Nothing is only soup. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. Hospital staff drifted in and out, carrying coffee cups. Some recognized Travis, but politely kept their distance. Eventually, he asked, What's your name? Grace Holloway. I'm Travis. I know. You recognized me. She smiled faintly. There are photographs of you in the hospital lobby. He almost laughed. I forgot about those. Grace took another bite of soup. You donated the children's respiratory equipment. My company did. You still signed the check. He shrugged. It needed doing. Grace looked at him carefully. You don't seem like the person they describe in magazines. What person is that? The billionaire who never smiles. Travis looked out the rain-covered window. They're not completely wrong. She didn't ask why. People usually revealed pain only after deciding someone was safe enough to hear it. Instead, she changed the subject. Thank you. For dinner. For asking if I'd eaten. He looked back at her. It surprised you? No, she corrected herself. It shocked me. She lowered her spoon. Almost everyone I've met since becoming homeless asks the same question. Which is, who's the baby's father? She gave a tired smile. Or, what did you do wrong? Sometimes. Are you on drugs? She looked directly into Travis's eyes. You're the first person in weeks who wanted to know whether I'd eaten. Those words settled heavily between them. Without realizing it, Travis remembered Emily. She had always carried protein bars in her purse, not for herself, for strangers, construction workers, teenagers, patients' families sleeping beside hospital beds. No one makes good decisions on an empty stomach, Emily used to say. The memory arrived so suddenly that Travis almost reached for the wedding ring he no longer wore. Instead, he wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. So, he asked quietly, what happens tonight? Grace looked toward the dark window. I'll keep calling shelters. And if none of them have room, I'll find somewhere. You mean outside? I've managed before. You shouldn't. I agree. She smiled sadly. But agreeing doesn't create empty beds. At that moment, Travis's phone vibrated. Daniel Brooks. he answered. I'm with someone. Daniel didn't waste time. I just received another notice from the estate. Travis closed his eyes briefly. It couldn't wait. No. The trustees moved the review meeting forward. How much time? 19 days. After a long silence, Daniel added quietly, I know how much you hate talking about this. But unless something changes... The Reed Family Foundation is gone. Travis stared through the rain. Nearly $2 billion. Hundreds of maternal health programs, scholarships, children's hospitals, research grants, everything his father had spent decades building. Daniel continued. Have you made any decision? No. You need to. The call ended. Grace pretended not to have listened. She carefully folded her napkin. I should go. It's still pouring. I'll be all right. No. He spoke before thinking. Grace stopped. Travis leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, logic and emotion collided instead of moving in separate directions. Across from him sat a woman who needed safety. He needed a family in the eyes of the law. Ordinarily, the thought would have sounded absurd, even offensive. Yet another thought refused to leave him. Emily's final words. No mother should ever feel alone. He looked at Grace's worn shoes, the oversized coat draped across her shoulders, the cardboard box resting protectively beside her chair, the tiny yellow baby shoes hidden inside. He wasn't seeing a stranger anymore. He was seeing someone the world had quietly walked past. Slowly, carefully, he spoke. I know this is going to sound impossible. Grace waited. I have a proposal. Her expression immediately changed. If this was about money, she would refuse. If it came with conditions she couldn't accept, she would walk away. Travis folded his hands on the table. His voice remained calm. I need someone I can trust. Grace frowned. I don't understand. He took one slow breath. What I'm about to ask may be the strangest question you've ever heard. Outside thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline as rain continued to fall against the cafe windows. Inside, neither of them realized that the next sentence would alter both of their lives forever. Grace waited. She had expected many things from a billionaire. A lecture, a donation, perhaps a business card with the number of another charity. She had not expected uncertainty. Travis wasn't speaking like a man who had rehearsed a speech. He looked almost uncomfortable, as if every word had to push through years of silence before reaching the surface. Finally, he said, I'm going to tell you something that almost no one knows. Grace remained still. If after you hear it you decide to walk away, I'll understand. She nodded. I'm listening. Travis folded his hands together. My father created a family foundation that funds children's hospitals, maternal care programs, and medical research. I read about it once. He believed wealth should protect families. Grace quietly waited for him to continue. When he passed away, he left one condition in his will. What kind of condition? I inherit full control of the foundation only if I establish a legally recognized family before the trustees meet. Grace frowned. A family? A legal one. The words sounded strangely empty once they were spoken aloud. She looked at him for several seconds. So, you need a wife. He didn't try to soften it. Yes. A faint smile crossed Grace's face. Not because she found it amusing, because the situation felt too impossible to be real. You've got to be kidding. I wish I were. She leaned back in her chair. I'm homeless. I know. I'm 8 months pregnant. I know. The baby's father disappeared. I know. You don't even know me. No. Then why are you asking me? Travis looked down at the coffee growing cold between his hands. Because I think I know enough. Grace let out a quiet laugh. No, Mr. Reed. You really don't. I know you protected those shoes before you protected yourself. She instinctively glanced toward the cardboard box beside her chair. I know you refused money. I know you thanked the social worker even when she couldn't help you. I know you prayed before eating. I know you're worried about your daughter more than yourself. He raised his eyes. Those things tell me more about your character than a background check ever could. Grace swallowed. No one had described her that way in a very long time. Still, she shook her head. You don't need character. You need paperwork. I need someone I can trust. The words lingered between them. After a moment, Travis continued. I'm proposing a legal marriage for 6 months. Grace stared at him. It would be a contract. No expectations beyond what we agreed to. You would have a private room in my home. I would never interfere with your pregnancy. I would never claim your child. You would have complete access to medical care. When the 6 months are over, he paused, you would be free to leave. Grace blinked twice. The entire conversation felt detached from reality. She had spent the past month wondering where she would sleep. Now a billionaire was calmly discussing a marriage contract over chicken soup. There has to be something else. There isn't. There always is. She folded her arms. What do you get besides your inheritance? The foundation. And nothing. She looked directly into his eyes. You honestly expect me to believe that? Yes. No man offers marriage to a stranger for nothing. I didn't say it was for nothing. She waited. It's for the foundation. And maybe... He stopped himself. Maybe what... Travis looked toward the rain. Maybe because I don't think my wife would forgive me if I ignored you. Grace frowned. Your wife? She passed away. Silence settled over the table. I'm sorry. So am I. Neither asked another question about it. Some griefs introduced themselves without needing explanation. Grace slowly picked up the cardboard box. If I agreed, you'd have everything written by attorneys. You could add your own lawyer. I don't have a lawyer. I'd pay for one. She almost laughed again. You're making this sound like a business merger. It probably does. And marriage shouldn't. No, it shouldn't. For the first time, Travis looked genuinely tired. Not physically, emotionally. Like someone who had carried an invisible weight for years. Grace softened slightly. I believe you're trying to help. I am. But I can't. He looked surprised. She stood slowly. I've spent months learning that survival isn't worth losing myself. I won't marry someone because I'm desperate. You deserve someone who loves you. And my daughter deserves to know I didn't trade my future for a roof. Travis rose as well. I'm not asking you to trade anything. It feels like I would. She carefully slipped his coat from her shoulders and held it out. Thank you. For dinner. For listening. For treating me like a human being. She smiled sadly. I won't forget that. Travis accepted the coat without moving. Rain still hammered the windows. You don't have anywhere safe tonight. I'll figure something out. You shouldn't have to. I know. She lifted the cardboard box beneath one arm. The world doesn't always care what should happen. Grace turned and walked toward the cafe entrance. Travis watched her disappear through the automatic doors into the cold October rain. For several long seconds, he remained motionless. Then his phone vibrated again. Daniel. Did you ask her? Yes. And she refused. Daniel sighed. I was afraid of that. I'm going home. Travis. What? If you really believe she's the right person, don't let one answer be the last conversation. The line went quiet. Outside, Grace crossed the hospital parking lot with no umbrella. The rain soaked her hoodie within moments. She walked without direction, simply putting one foot in front of the other. Half a mile away stood a temporary emergency shelter operated inside an old church gymnasium. By the time she reached it, nearly 40 people were already waiting outside. A volunteer stepped through the doors carrying a clipboard. "I'm sorry. We're full." A young woman near the front of the line burst into tears. She couldn't have been older than 23. She was visibly pregnant. "Please," she begged. "I don't need a bed. I'll sleep on the floor." The volunteer's face tightened with regret. "I wish we had space." "We don't." The doors closed. The line slowly dispersed into the rainy night. Grace stood frozen on the sidewalk. She watched the young woman sink onto the church steps, covering her face with both hands. Without thinking, Grace walked over and placed the unopened blanket the hospital had given her across the stranger's shoulders. "What about you?" the woman whispered. Grace managed a gentle smile. "I'll keep walking." She turned away before the woman could refuse. The cold hit immediately. The wind felt sharper now without the blanket. She wrapped both arms around the cardboard box containing the tiny yellow shoes. Her daughter kicked once. "I'm trying," she whispered through trembling lips. "I really am." Several miles away, Travis sat alone behind the wheel of his sedan. He had started the engine twice. Twice he had turned it off again. For the first time in many years, business logic no longer felt sufficient. He couldn't stop thinking about one image. A homeless woman with nowhere to sleep, giving away the only blanket she owned. Grace had walked less than 2 blocks before a pair of headlights slowed beside the sidewalk. She didn't stop. After everything that had happened over the past few months, she had learned never to assume a car pulling alongside a homeless woman meant safety. The passenger window lowered. It was Travis. He wasn't sitting in the back this time. He was driving himself. He rolled down the window just enough for the rain to drift inside. "I'd like 5 more minutes." Grace kept walking. "I already gave you an answer." "I know." "I'm not here to change it." She finally stopped beneath a flickering street lamp. Rainwater dripped from the ends of her hair. The cardboard box remained tucked safely beneath her arm. Travis stepped out of the car without opening an umbrella. Within seconds, the shoulders of his white dress shirt darkened with rain. Grace noticed, but said nothing. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked puzzled. "I asked you to make a life-changing decision after one conversation. I wasn't thinking about what it sounded like from your side." Grace crossed her arms. "It sounded like you were trying to solve 2 problems with 1 contract." "You're right. And I don't want to become anyone's solution." "I don't want that either." For a long moment, neither spoke. Cars hissed past on the wet street. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the city. Finally, Travis reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. "I had Daniel prepare a draft." Grace frowned. "You had legal papers written already?" "I asked him to prepare them after dinner." "I didn't even say yes." "I know." "I also told him not to print them until tomorrow." He smiled faintly. "I ignored my own instruction?" Instead of handing her the document, he unfolded it himself. "I want you to hear every condition before you ever see a signature line." Grace remained silent. Travis read slowly. "The agreement shall never require physical intimacy of any kind." He looked up. "That stays." She gave a small nod. "Grace Holloway shall retain complete legal and parental rights over her child before, during, and after the agreement." Another pause. "That stays," he continued. "Grace may leave the residence at any time without permission. Grace may terminate the agreement immediately if she feels unsafe or disrespected. Grace shall receive independent legal representation chosen by her." He folded the paper. I'll pay the attorney. You choose the attorney. You choose whether to sign. She stared at him. Why would you agree to all of that? Because if you don't have freedom... He looked at the rain collecting along the curb. Then it's not an agreement. It's control. Grace searched his face for any hint of manipulation. She found none. Only exhaustion. You've thought about this. I've been thinking about family for 10 years. The words landed with unexpected weight. Grace looked away. I still can't. Travis nodded once. I understand. He carefully folded the document again. Then, instead of putting it back into his pocket, he tore it in half. Grace blinked. He tore it once more. Then again. The pieces fluttered into the trash bin beside the sidewalk. What are you doing? Removing the pressure. You don't owe me an answer tonight. He opened the driver's door. I'll ask you one favor instead. She waited. If you can't trust me. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a simple white business card. Trust this. He handed it to her. On the front were only 3 lines. Travis Reed, personal office. A private phone number. Nothing else. No company logo, Grace asked. I wanted it to look like a person's number, not a billionaire's. If you ever need help, he hesitated. Call? No promises, no contracts. No questions. Grace slipped the card into the pocket of her hoodie. Thank you. He nodded. I hope you never need it. With that, Travis drove away. Grace stood watching the taillights disappear into the rain. For the first time in weeks, she felt conflicted. Not because she wanted to accept his proposal, because she couldn't decide whether she had just met the strangest man in Chicago or the kindest. That night, shortly after midnight, the temperature dropped to 37 degrees. Grace found temporary shelter beneath the covered entrance of a closed neighborhood library. The concrete was cold enough to numb her legs. She folded her backpack into a pillow. The cardboard box rested beneath her head. One hand remained over her stomach. The other touched the business card inside her pocket. She never intended to use it. Still, she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Across the city, Travis unlocked the front door of the Reed estate. The mansion stood in complete silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan. Fireplaces glowed automatically. Fresh flowers decorated the foyer every Monday. Everything appeared perfect. Everything felt empty. Margaret Ellis, the housekeeper who had worked for the Reed family for nearly 30 years, was waiting in the kitchen. She wore a gray cardigan over her uniform and was placing homemade soup into glass containers for the next day. You're late. I know. She looked at his soaked clothes. You walked in the rain. A little. You never walk in the rain. I did tonight. Margaret studied him carefully. She had watched Travis grow from a quiet teenager into a grieving widower. She recognized when something had shifted. You met someone. Travis almost smiled. Is it that obvious? You remembered to get wet. He laughed softly for the first time in months. Margaret poured him a bowl of soup. You haven't laughed in a while. He sat at the kitchen table instead of eating alone in the dining room. I met a pregnant woman tonight. Margaret waited patiently. She has nowhere to sleep. And? I asked her to marry me. The spoon slipped from Margaret's hand and clattered against the counter. You what? He quietly explained everything. The foundation, the contract, the refusal, the yellow baby shoes. When he finished, Margaret didn't speak immediately. Instead, she carried the soup to the table. She placed it in front of him. Then she sat across from him, something she had never done without being invited. Travis. Did you ask her because you need a wife? He stared into the steam rising from the bowl. I thought I did. And now? He remembered Grace giving away her only blanket. He remembered her refusing money. He remembered her protecting those tiny yellow shoes from the rain. He answered honestly. Now? I think I just don't want her to face tomorrow alone. Margaret reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. Then whatever happens next. Don't stop trying to help her. Just make sure you're helping the woman. Not your loneliness. Hundreds of miles of rain clouds continued drifting across Chicago through the early hours of morning. Neither Travis nor Grace slept much that night. One lay awake in a mansion that felt far too large. The other lay awake beneath a library awning that felt far too cold. Both believed the conversation between them had ended. Neither realized that before the next afternoon was over, fate would place them together once again under circumstances neither could have predicted. Grace woke before sunrise because the cold had settled deep into her bones. The library entrance had protected her from the rain, but not from the wind. Every time she shifted, the concrete beneath her reminded her that another night outside would become even harder as winter approached. She sat up slowly, rubbing her hands together. The cardboard box was still tucked safely beneath her arm. She opened it for only a moment. The tiny yellow shoes were dry. She smiled with quiet relief. One more day, she whispered to the baby. We made it through one more day. The business card was still inside her hoodie pocket. She pulled it out. The white card looked strangely clean compared to everything else she owned. Travis Reed, a phone number, nothing more. She almost tore it in half. Instead, she slipped it back into her pocket. She wanted to believe she would never need it. At 7:30 that morning, she arrived at a community employment center. Although her pregnancy was obvious, she still asked whether anyone needed temporary workers. The receptionist looked at her apologetically. We've got warehouse jobs. Grace smiled faintly. I don't think lifting furniture is a great idea right now. The woman checked another list. A grocery store needs overnight stockers. I can't stand for 10 hours anymore. I'm sorry. Grace thanked her anyway. As she turned to leave, she noticed a flyer taped beside the door. Maternity Housing Assistance Workshop. Registration closed. She stared at the words for several seconds before quietly walking away. Across town, Travis was attending a quarterly board meeting. Executives discussed manufacturing costs, expansion plans, and projected revenue. Charts filled the conference room screens. Voices debated percentages. No one noticed that their CEO hadn't spoken for nearly 20 minutes. Instead of reviewing financial projections, Travis found himself remembering a soaked cardboard box. Mr. Reed, one of the directors looked toward him. Do you approve the proposal? He blinked. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? The room exchanged surprised glances. Travis Reed never lost focus, not until today. After the meeting ended, Daniel Brooks caught up with him in the hallway. You haven't heard a word anyone said. I heard enough. No. Daniel lowered his voice. You've been thinking about her. Travis didn't deny it. I keep wondering where she slept. Daniel sighed. That's dangerous. Compassion isn't dangerous. No. But guilt can be. Travis leaned against the hallway window. I don't feel guilty. What do you feel? He looked toward the city below. I feel like I walked away from someone who needed help because I was afraid she'd misunderstand my intentions. Daniel studied him for a moment. Then, don't offer another contract. What do I offer? The truth. Meanwhile, Grace had reached the free prenatal clinic where she was scheduled for her monthly checkup. The waiting room was crowded. Young mothers, grandmothers, toddlers coloring in activity books. Grace smiled politely whenever someone made eye contact. She tried not to notice how many children sat on their father's laps. When the nurse finally called her name, Grace stepped onto the scale. "You've lost another 3 pounds," the nurse said gently. "I've been trying." "I know." The nurse measured the baby's heartbeat. A steady rhythm filled the small examination room. Strong, healthy. Grace closed her eyes. Every appointment that ended with those sounds felt like a miracle. Dr. Linda Foster entered carrying a tablet. She had cared for Grace throughout the pregnancy and knew more than anyone else about her situation. "How are you sleeping?" Grace smiled awkwardly. "A little here and there." "Where?" Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. The doctor already understood. After the examination ended, Dr. Foster closed the tablet. "I've called every shelter again." Grace nodded. "I figured. They're still full." "It's okay." "No." The doctor leaned forward. "It isn't okay." She reached into a drawer and handed Grace a small envelope. "Transportation vouchers." "I can't take these." "You can." "They're donated." Grace accepted them quietly. Then Dr. Foster asked the question that changed everything. "If someone offered you a safe home?" Grace looked up. "Would you refuse it because of pride?" Grace remained silent. The doctor continued carefully. "I'm not talking about charity. I'm talking about protecting your daughter." Grace's eyes drifted toward the cardboard box on the chair. "I don't know." "I thought I did." Dr. Foster smiled gently. "Being strong isn't the same as carrying every burden alone." After leaving the clinic, Grace walked toward a nearby park. Children laughed on the playground despite the cold. Parents pushed swings. Someone had left a small yellow rubber ball beneath a bench. The color reminded her of the baby shoes. She sat down. For nearly 15 minutes, she watched families without feeling bitter, only wistful. Her daughter deserved afternoons like these, not nights beneath library awnings. Her phone, an old prepaid device with barely enough battery to last another day, buzzed unexpectedly. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello? Miss Holloway?" "Yes." "This is St. Catherine Medical Center." Her heart skipped. "Is something wrong?" "No. The social worker you met yesterday asked us to call if a maternity shelter had an opening." Grace sat upright. "There is one bed available." Relief flooded through her chest. "When—" The woman hesitated. "I'm sorry. It was filled 10 minutes ago." Grace closed her eyes. "I understand. We wanted you to know we tried. Thank you." She ended the call and remained seated. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears slipping down tired cheeks. After several minutes, she reached into her pocket. The white business card rested between her fingers. She stared at the phone number. "No." She whispered the word aloud. "I can't." Yet another voice quietly answered inside her heart. "You're not asking for money. You're asking your daughter for a chance." Miles away, Travis stood in the nursery that had remained untouched for 10 years. Dust no longer covered the furniture because Margaret cleaned it every week. The rocking chair, the bookshelf, the pale yellow walls. Everything waited for a child who had never come home. He unlocked the old cedar chest. For the first time in a decade, he lifted the lid. Inside lay a small white box. His hands trembled as he opened it. Nestled inside tissue paper rested a pair of tiny yellow baby shoes. He stared at them for a long time. Then he quietly closed the box again. At that exact moment, his cell phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. He answered immediately. "Travis Reed." Silence. Then a soft, uncertain voice. "It's Grace." He stood perfectly still. I need to ask you something." For a brief second, Travis couldn't speak. He had imagined countless reasons Grace might call. Perhaps she had found a lawyer. Perhaps she wanted to reject his proposal once and for all. Perhaps she had simply dialed the wrong number. Instead, there was only her quiet breathing on the other end of the line. "I'm here," he finally said. Grace swallowed. "I don't want to marry you." "I understand. I still think the idea is unbelievable." "I understand that too." She took a slow breath. "But I need you to answer one question honestly." "I will." "If I say yes, will you ever use my situation to control me?" The question cut deeper than Travis expected, not because it offended him, because he realized how many people must have done exactly that before. "No." "You answered too quickly." "I didn't need time." Silence settled again. "My mother used to tell me something," Travis continued quietly. "She said power is revealed by what people do when someone else has nowhere to go." Grace listened without interrupting. "If you come with me, you'll always have somewhere to go. If you leave later, that choice will still belong to you. You'll never owe me your freedom." She closed her eyes. "You really believe that?" "I do." Another long pause. "My doctor asked me something today." "What was that?" She asked whether I was protecting my pride. Grace rested one hand over her stomach. "Or protecting my daughter." The words hung between them. For the first time since losing everything, Grace admitted something to herself that she had been too afraid to say aloud. She wasn't only exhausted. She was frightened, not of being poor, not of sleeping outside. She was afraid of going into labor alone. She imagined herself on a freezing sidewalk, an empty bus station, a public restroom, no one to call, no safe place for her baby. The thought made her chest tighten. "I don't know what's right anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to decide tonight." "I do." "Why?" "Because I can feel winter arriving." Outside the phone booth where she stood, a cold wind pushed dried leaves across the parking lot. The temperature had already begun dropping again. Travis glanced toward the nursery upstairs before answering. "Where are you?" Grace hesitated. "A bus terminal." "Are you safe?" "I think so." "Stay where you are." "You don't have to come." "I'm coming anyway." Before she could object, he added gently, "I'm only bringing coffee. No paperwork. No lawyers. No contracts." The call ended. 40 minutes later, Travis's sedan pulled quietly into the nearly empty terminal parking lot. The station looked tired. Its fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Only a handful of travelers waited inside. Most of the benches were occupied by people trying to sleep. Grace sat near a vending machine with the cardboard box resting beside her feet. She looked smaller than Travis remembered. Not because she had changed, because the enormous terminal made loneliness easier to see. He approached carrying 2 paper cups and a small paper bag. "I guessed hot chocolate might be better than coffee." Grace accepted the cup. "It's been years since anyone guessed what I'd like." He smiled faintly. "I guessed. I might have been wrong." "You weren't." She wrapped both hands around the warm cup. For several minutes, they watched buses arrive and depart without speaking. Eventually, Travis handed her another envelope. Grace immediately pushed it back. "I told you." "It isn't money." She opened it carefully. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. The first page listed every condition of the proposed marriage agreement. The second page listed only her legal rights. The third page contained something unexpected. A handwritten letter. Not typed. Not notarized. Written in dark blue ink. She looked up. "You wrote this?" "I did." Grace unfolded the page. The handwriting was neat, but imperfect. "Dear Grace, If you choose to become part of this agreement, there is one promise I wanted to make without lawyers present. Your child will never be asked to call me father. Your child will never be used for publicity. You will never be expected to become someone you are not. You may disagree with me, challenge me, walk away from me. Those rights belong to every human being, whether rich or poor. If one day you decide our agreement should end, I will help you leave with dignity. Not because you owe me gratitude, but because I owe you respect. Travis Reed Grace finished reading twice, then folded the letter very carefully. No attorney wrote this. No. Why? Because lawyers write contracts. And people write promises. Grace stared at the paper for a long time. The station loudspeaker announced another departing bus. A child somewhere nearby laughed, then cried. His mother lifted him into her arms. Grace unconsciously rested her hand over her own stomach. I've been thinking about something. Travis waited. The night you asked me to marry you, I thought you were rescuing me. I wasn't. I know. She looked at him. You were asking me to help rescue something important to you, too. The foundation. Yes. Grace nodded slowly. So this isn't charity? No. It's cooperation. That's what I hoped. She smiled for the first time since they met. A small smile, but genuine. I can live with cooperation. Before Travis could answer, a familiar voice echoed across the terminal. There you are? Grace froze. Her shoulders stiffened instantly. She recognized that voice before she even turned around. Derek Lawson walked toward them, wearing a leather jacket and the same careless smile she had once mistaken for confidence. He looked older than when she had last seen him, more tired, but no less dangerous. Grace. He spread his arms as though greeting an old friend. I've been looking everywhere for you. Her face lost all color. Travis immediately noticed the fear in her eyes. Not anger, fear. Derek glanced at Travis's tailored coat, the luxury sedan outside, and the envelope resting on the bench. His smile widened. Well, he chuckled. I disappear for a few months, and suddenly you found yourself a rich boyfriend. Grace stood. You need to leave. I came to see my baby. You lost that, right? I didn't lose anything. He stepped closer. I'm still the father. Travis calmly rose to his feet. I think she's asked you to leave. Derek looked him up and down. And who are you supposed to be? Before Travis answered, Derek recognized him. His expression changed instantly. No way. He laughed in disbelief. You're Travis Reed. His eyes shifted between the billionaire and Grace. Then an ugly smile slowly spread across his face. I knew she'd be worth something someday. Grace felt her stomach tighten. For the first time since they met, Travis saw not just the woman she had become, but the man she had spent months trying to escape. The smile vanished from Derek Lawson's face the moment he realized Travis wasn't intimidated. Instead, it twisted into something sharper. So this is how it works now, Derek said loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. You disappear for a few months, then you find yourself a billionaire. Grace stepped backward. Stop. I wasn't talking to you. You never listened when I was talking, she replied. Several people waiting for the midnight bus glanced toward the growing confrontation. Travis remained calm. I think this conversation is over. Derek laughed. You think? He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and looked Travis up and down. Do you even know who she is? I know enough. No, you don't. He pointed toward Grace. She owes money all over the city. Grace's shoulders stiffened. Derek continued as though performing for an audience. Collectors are looking for her. She doesn't even have a place to live. You really want to bring that mess into your mansion? Grace lowered her eyes. Those words had once destroyed her confidence. Tonight they hurt for a different reason. She didn't want Travis dragged into the consequences of someone else's crimes. Before she could speak, Travis answered quietly. The debts were created under her name. Derek blinked. So, they weren't created by her. The grin slowly faded from Derek's face. You've been investigating me. I asked questions. You had no right. I had every right before inviting someone into my life. Grace turned toward Travis in surprise. You already knew. He nodded. Daniel contacted an attorney who specializes in financial fraud. You reported the identity theft months ago. You cooperated with investigators. There are signed statements from your former employer, and witnesses who confirmed debt collectors harassed you at work. Grace stared at him. You believed me. I never thought you were lying. For a brief second, Grace forgot Derek was even standing there. Someone had finally looked beyond the unpaid bills and seen the truth. Derek quickly recovered. So what? He folded his arms. She's still carrying my baby. Grace's expression hardened. No? The single word came with a certainty Travis had never heard from her before. You abandoned us. You disappeared. You sold the truck. You emptied our account. You forged documents. You don't get to call this child yours when you walked away before she even had a heartbeat. Derek scoffed. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to. You'll lose in court. I'll see my daughter. Grace slowly shook her head. You don't want a daughter. You want leverage. The accusation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Derek's eyes shifted toward Travis, then to the expensive watch on his wrist, then back again. I think we can work something out. Travis understood immediately. This isn't about Grace. No. It's about money. Derek smiled again. Now you're catching on. The station became eerily quiet. Even the television mounted in the waiting area seemed too loud. Derek stepped closer. I'm a practical guy. You don't want headlines. I don't want lawyers. So here's what we do. He named a number. $500,000. Grace stared at him in disbelief. What? You pay me. I disappear forever. She looked as though someone had struck her. You would sell your own child, he shrugged. I'd call it settling a misunderstanding. Before Grace could answer, Travis spoke. I won't pay you. Derek laughed. Then enjoy the custody battle. There won't be one. Oh, you've already admitted in front of multiple witnesses that you're willing to exchange parental involvement for money. Derek's smile disappeared. What? Travis glanced toward the security camera mounted above the terminal entrance, then toward the station security officer who had quietly approached during the argument. The cameras have audio. The officer nodded. They do. Derek's confidence cracked for the first time. You set me up. No. You revealed yourself. Grace had spent months imagining this confrontation. In every version she cried, or begged, or ran away. Instead, she felt strangely calm. She reached into her backpack and removed a worn envelope. I've carried these for months. Inside were copies of police reports, fraud complaints, bank correspondence, messages Derek had sent before disappearing. She handed them directly to the security officer. I'd like this incident documented. Derek took one step backward. You're serious. I should have been sooner. You wouldn't. I already did. The officer requested Derek remain where he was while local police were notified. Derek looked around the station. No one appeared sympathetic anymore. The people who had once watched with curiosity now looked at him with open disgust. He pointed one last time toward Grace. "You'll regret this." Grace met his eyes without flinching. "No. I regret trusting you. I'll never regret protecting my daughter." For several seconds, Derek said nothing. Then he turned abruptly and hurried toward the exit before the officer could stop him. "Sir." The officer followed, calling for backup over his radio. Within moments, Derek disappeared into the rainy night. The station slowly returned to normal. Passengers resumed conversations. The television continued broadcasting tomorrow's weather. But Grace remained frozen. Her knees suddenly felt weak. Without saying a word, Travis pulled a chair toward her. She sat. Not because she wanted to, because she no longer trusted her legs. Her breathing became uneven. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You have nothing to apologize for." "He'll keep coming back." "Maybe." "I don't want this becoming your problem." Travis looked at the folder of police reports resting on the bench. "It already became my concern the moment I realized someone had convinced you that surviving meant facing everything alone." Grace covered her face with both hands. For the first time since they met, she wasn't crying from fear. She was crying from exhaustion. Months of pretending to be strong finally caught up with her. Travis waited. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty reassurance. He simply remained beside her. Several minutes later, she lowered her hands. "I can't keep doing this." "I know. I'm tired. I know. I'm tired of wondering where I'll sleep. I'm tired of pretending my daughter can't feel how scared I am." She looked directly at him. "If..." She struggled to finish the sentence. "If I agree." "You'll still have the right to change your mind," he answered before she could ask. She nodded slowly. "I have one condition." "Name it." "I won't move into your house tonight." Travis looked surprised. "I need one day. One day. I need to make this decision because it's right. Not because Derek frightened me. I need to know I'm choosing hope. Not running from fear." For a long moment, Travis simply looked at her. Then he smiled. "A wise attorney once told me never to rush someone into signing an important document." Grace managed a faint smile. "Who was the attorney?" "I think his name was Grace Holloway." For the first time that evening, she laughed. It was quiet, brief, but real. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Clouds slowly drifted apart, revealing a few scattered stars above the sleeping city. Neither of them noticed the tiny break in the sky, but both felt in different ways that something inside them had begun to clear as well. The next morning arrived with a pale gray sky and an unexpected stillness. For the first time in weeks, Grace didn't wake beneath concrete or beneath the noise of passing buses. After leaving the terminal the night before, Travis had honored every word he had given her. He hadn't driven her to his estate. He hadn't taken her to a lawyer. Instead, at Grace's request, he had arranged a private room at a small maternity residence operated by a church on the north side of the city. A last-minute cancellation had opened one bed for only 48 hours. He paid the fee anonymously through Daniel. Grace learned about it only after the administrator quietly told her, "Someone wanted you to have time instead of pressure." That sentence stayed with her all night. No one had tried to buy her decision. Someone had simply bought her time. She stood beside the narrow window of her temporary room, watching autumn leaves drift across the church courtyard. The room was simple. A twin bed, a wooden dresser, a rocking chair with faded blue cushions. On the bedside table sat the cardboard box containing the yellow baby shoes. Grace opened it carefully. The little shoes seemed brighter in the morning light. She touched one with her fingertips. "I think we're finally getting close," she whispered to her unborn daughter. Across town, Travis sat in Daniel Brooks's office instead of his own. Stacks of legal documents covered the conference table. Daniel removed his glasses. I received your message. I need the agreement rewritten. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Again. Again. You've already made it unusually generous. It isn't generous. It's fair. Daniel smiled faintly. Most billionaires don't know the difference. Travis slid a sheet of paper across the table. I want these added. Daniel read silently. Grace would receive full financial assistance for vocational education after the agreement ended. A furnished apartment would be provided for 1 year if she chose to leave. A trust fund would be created solely for the child's education, regardless of whether the marriage continued. Daniel looked up. You're aware these benefits remain even if she leaves after 6 months? Yes. And if she never develops feelings for you? Yes. And if she falls in love with someone else years from now? Travis hesitated only briefly. Then I hope he's worthy of her. Daniel slowly leaned back. You've already stopped thinking about this as a contract. Travis looked toward the window. I think I have. Then why keep calling it one? The question lingered after Daniel left the room to revise the paperwork. Meanwhile, Grace spent the afternoon helping another resident fold donated baby clothes. The shelter housed 7 expectant mothers. Each carried a different story. Some escaped abusive relationships. Some had aged out of foster care. Some had simply run out of people willing to answer the phone. Despite their different paths, every woman recognized the same look in Grace's eyes. The look of someone standing between fear and hope. An older volunteer named Mrs. Evelyn Carter noticed Grace carefully repairing a loose button on an infant blanket. You sew? A little. My grandmother taught me. Mrs. Carter smiled. She taught you well. Grace shrugged. When something tears, I don't like throwing it away. The older woman nodded thoughtfully. People are like that too. Late that afternoon, Dr. Linda Foster arrived unexpectedly. I heard you finally found a safe bed. Grace smiled. For 2 nights. Sometimes 2 nights is enough to make the next decision clearly. The doctor sat beside her. How's the baby? Grace rested both hands across her stomach. Very active. Good. Then the doctor's expression became more serious. Grace. Yesterday your blood pressure was higher than I'd like. Grace's smile faded. Is the baby okay? Right now, yes. But stress is beginning to affect your pregnancy. She paused. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because your daughter needs stability during these last few weeks. Grace lowered her head. I know. You've spent months surviving. Now it's time to think beyond surviving. That evening, Grace walked alone through the church garden. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. A small bronze statue of a mother holding a child stood near the center of the courtyard. She sat on a nearby bench. Inside her coat pocket rested Travis's handwritten letter. She unfolded it again. This time she wasn't reading the promises. She was reading the handwriting. Some lines pressed deeply into the paper. Others grew lighter near the edges. It looked like someone who rarely wrote personal letters. Someone who had chosen every sentence carefully. Not because he wanted to impress her. Because he didn't want to hurt her. Grace folded the letter once more. Then she noticed another sentence she hadn't fully appreciated before. You will never be expected to become someone you are not. For months, the world had demanded exactly that. Debt collectors wanted her to become a criminal. Shelters expected her to become another number. Strangers assumed she had become irresponsible. Derek wanted her to become silent. Travis was asking for the opposite. Remain yourself. That realization frightened her more than the proposal itself, because it meant trusting someone again. At nearly the same hour, Travis drove to Lakeshore Manor. He hadn't planned the visit. His hand simply turned the steering wheel in that direction. Mrs. Eleanor Watkins still lived there. Although her memory had faded, she immediately recognized him. Emily's husband. Travis smiled. I haven't heard anyone call me that in a long time. She patted the chair beside her. You look lonely. He laughed softly. I thought I was hiding it. Not from old nurses. He sat. After a few minutes, she asked, Have you finally met someone who makes you remember you're alive? Travis stared in surprise. How did you know? Because that's the only reason widowers come asking old women for advice. He smiled again. It's complicated. It always is. He told her about Grace. Not every detail, just enough. When he finished, Eleanor looked toward the sunset outside her window. My Harold proposed 3 times. 3. I refused twice. Why? Because I thought accepting help made me weak. She chuckled. Turns out I was only making both of us miserable. Travis listened quietly. She squeezed his hand. Young man. I'm 48. To me, that's young. They both laughed. Then Eleanor became serious. If that woman says yes, don't spend your time convincing her she belongs in your world. Spend your time proving your world deserves her. The words followed Travis all the way home. That night, just before 9 o'clock, Grace called him. He answered after the first ring. Hello? It's me. I know. There was no hesitation this time. No trembling, only calm. I've made my decision. Travis's heart beat faster, though his voice remained steady. I'm listening. I'll marry you. She paused. But only if we both remember one thing. What is it? This marriage may begin as an agreement. She looked down at the tiny yellow shoes beside her bed. But if it ever becomes a family, it has to happen honestly. Travis closed his eyes. I wouldn't want it any other way. 3 days later, under a pale autumn sky, Grace Holloway and Travis Reed stood inside a quiet courtroom on the 2nd floor of the Cook County Clerk's office. There were no photographers, no floral arrangements, no music. Just a judge, 2 witnesses, Daniel Brooks and Margaret Ellis. Grace wore a simple, cream-colored maternity dress that Margaret had quietly purchased from a neighborhood boutique. When Margaret had offered it that morning, Grace immediately reached for her purse. I'll pay you back. The older woman smiled warmly. You can. Grace looked relieved. When another frightened young mother needs help someday. Grace looked down at the folded dress resting in her lap. I think I can do that. Margaret gently squeezed her shoulder. Then we're already even. Now standing inside the courtroom, Grace kept one hand resting beneath her stomach. The other still held the small cardboard box. The yellow baby shoes had come with her, not because they were needed, because they reminded her why she was standing there. The judge adjusted his glasses. I understand this is a private civil ceremony. Yes, Your Honor, Daniel answered. The judge glanced toward Travis. You understand the legal responsibilities of marriage? I do. He turned toward Grace. And you? Grace met his eyes. I do. There was no dramatic declaration, no overwhelming romance, only 2 adults making a difficult promise with complete honesty. When the brief ceremony ended, the judge smiled kindly. I've officiated hundreds of weddings. He closed the file. I don't know where your story will lead. But I hope you always remember that respect usually lasts longer than excitement. Those words stayed with both of them. Outside, Margaret quietly wiped away tears. Daniel pretended not to notice. He handed Travis a small envelope. The trustees have already been notified. So that's finished. Travis nodded. One chapter is? Grace looked toward him. And another begins. For the first time since they had met, neither of them referred to the marriage as a contract. The word seemed unnecessary now. The drive to the Reed estate took almost 40 minutes. Grace watched the city change outside the window. Apartment buildings slowly gave way to quiet neighborhoods, lined with old oak trees. She wasn't looking at expensive homes. She was studying ordinary things. Children riding bicycles, a father washing his pickup truck, a woman hanging laundry despite the cool weather, pieces of everyday life, the things she wanted most. When the iron gates of the Reed estate opened, Grace instinctively held her breath. The property was beautiful without feeling extravagant. Wide gardens stretched toward the lake. Maple trees glowed with orange and gold leaves. A stone pathway curved toward a large but understated brick home. "It's quieter than I expected," Grace said softly. "I wanted a home," Travis answered. "Not a museum." Margaret opened the front door before they reached it. "Welcome home." Grace hesitated. The words caught her off guard. She wasn't ready to call it home, but she appreciated hearing them. Inside, several household employees stood waiting, not in a formal line, simply gathered in the foyer. Some smiled, some looked curious, others appeared uncertain. Travis addressed everyone before anyone could begin whispering. "This is Grace. My wife." He paused deliberately. "She deserves exactly the same respect you give me. If anyone finds that difficult," he looked calmly around the room, "you won't be working here very long." Silence followed. Then the elderly groundskeeper stepped forward first. He removed his gardening gloves. "Welcome, ma'am." One by one, the others introduced themselves. The chef, the chauffeur, the housekeeping staff. No applause, no exaggerated enthusiasm. Just simple courtesy. Grace noticed something immediately. No one asked about the baby's father. No one asked whether the marriage was real. They simply asked if she needed anything to eat. She almost smiled. Margaret led her upstairs. "The nursery is this way." Grace stopped walking. Nursery. Margaret quickly realized her mistake. "Oh," she looked embarrassed. "I meant the guest room." Grace gently touched her arm. "It's all right." Margaret lowered her voice. "There is a nursery in this house. There has been for years." Grace didn't ask why. Some rooms carried stories people offered only when they were ready. Instead, Margaret opened the guest room door. Sunlight poured through large windows overlooking the lake. The room was comfortable rather than luxurious. Bookshelves, a rocking chair, fresh flowers, a knitted blanket folded neatly across the bed. Grace placed the cardboard box on the dresser. The yellow shoes looked strangely at peace there. Later that evening, after unpacking the few belongings she owned, Grace wandered downstairs in search of water. Passing the kitchen, she heard laughter. The chef and 2 assistants were preparing dinner. One young assistant accidentally dropped an entire tray of chopped vegetables onto the floor. He froze. "I'm so sorry." "I'll start over," the chef sighed. "We're already behind." Without thinking, Grace stepped inside. "May I help?" The chef looked uncertain. "You don't have to." "I know." She rolled up her sleeves. "But I can." Within minutes, she was chopping carrots with practiced precision. Years of preparing meals for nursing home residents had taught her speed and patience. The kitchen gradually relaxed. Conversation returned. Someone turned on an old jazz station. By the time Travis entered carrying his briefcase, he stopped in surprise. Grace stood beside the stove, laughing quietly as the chef argued over whether cornbread should contain honey. No one seemed uncomfortable anymore. She wasn't acting like the lady of the house. She was simply helping. Margaret noticed Travis watching from the doorway. "She has that effect." "What effect?" "People stop feeling like employees. They start feeling like family." Dinner that night was surprisingly ordinary. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread. Grace expected to eat alone in her room. Instead, Travis pulled out a chair. "We usually eat here." "If you'd rather have privacy," she shook her head. "No. I've eaten alone long enough." Halfway through the meal, Grace quietly reached into her purse. She placed a folded sheet of paper beside Travis's plate. "What is this?" "A monthly budget." He unfolded it. Every expense was listed: food, medical visits, transportation, baby supplies. At the bottom was a handwritten sentence: "I don't expect you to pay for things I can eventually pay for myself." Travis looked up. "You made a budget." "I always do." "You don't need to." "I do." She smiled gently. "If I stop planning for independence, I'll forget why I accepted your proposal." He folded the paper carefully instead of throwing it away. "I'd like us to review it together tomorrow." Grace nodded. "I'd like that." Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Grace stepped quietly into the hallway carrying a glass of water. A door near the end of the corridor stood slightly open. Warm light spilled across the floor. She wasn't trying to be curious, but as she passed, she accidentally glanced inside. A small room. Pale yellow walls. A wooden crib untouched by time. Shelves lined with children's books, and on a rocking chair, a tiny pair of yellow baby shoes. Grace stopped walking. Her heartbeat slowed. For the first time, she understood that she wasn't the only person in this house who had been carrying hope inside a small pair of yellow shoes. Grace stood in the nursery doorway long after everyone else had gone to bed. Moonlight spilled through the window, casting soft silver lines across the empty crib. She wasn't intruding. She wasn't searching for secrets. She simply couldn't move. On the rocking chair rested the tiny yellow shoes, not identical to hers, different stitching, different laces, but the same hopeful color. Yellow. Hope. The coincidence felt almost impossible. She quietly stepped backward and pulled the door nearly shut, leaving it exactly as she had found it. The next morning she woke earlier than usual. She prepared herself a simple breakfast before anyone else came downstairs. Old habits were difficult to break. At Lakeshore Manor, she had always arrived before sunrise. At the shelter, breakfast disappeared quickly if someone wasn't first in line. Now she stood in a beautiful kitchen, instinctively counting slices of bread before taking one. The chef, Marcus, entered a few minutes later. "You know you don't have to ask permission to eat." Grace smiled sheepishly. "I know. It's just—" She looked around. "I'm still getting used to this." Marcus poured coffee into his mug. "My grandmother used to say something." "What was that?" "When a bird finally finds a safe branch, it still checks the wind for a while." Grace smiled. "She sounds wise." She was. Before breakfast ended, Travis entered wearing a navy sweater instead of his usual business suit. Grace noticed immediately. "No meetings today?" "I canceled them." "You canceled an entire day." "I'd rather spend it explaining a few things." She understood what he meant. The nursery, the shoes, the silence between them. After Margaret cleared the dishes, Travis looked toward Grace. "Would you walk with me?" She nodded. Outside, the gardens stretched toward the lake. The cold air carried the scent of pine and damp leaves. Neither spoke until they reached a wooden bench overlooking the water. Finally, Travis broke the silence. "You saw the nursery." Grace looked embarrassed. "The door was open." "I know. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy." "I know that too." He sat down slowly. "So," she chose her words carefully, "the yellow shoes." He looked toward the lake instead of answering immediately. "They belonged to our daughter." The sentence came quietly, without drama, without self-pity, only truth. "My wife bought them." "I did." He smiled faintly. Emily wanted yellow because she believed yellow meant hope. Grace felt her throat tighten. I bought mine for the same reason. I figured. For several moments, they simply listened to waves touching the shoreline. Then Travis continued. After Emily died, I closed that room. I never allowed anyone to change it, not because I thought she'd come back. He looked down at his hands. I just couldn't survive saying goodbye twice. Grace understood more than he realized. I kept talking to my baby after I became homeless. He looked toward her. Every night. I'd tell her we were just camping. She laughed softly at the memory. I didn't want her first home to be fear. Travis closed his eyes briefly. Emily did something similar. When treatments kept failing, she refused to call the empty room a nursery. What did she call it? The room that's still waiting. Grace smiled sadly. She sounds wonderful. She was. Neither felt uncomfortable speaking about Emily. Grace never sensed that Travis was comparing them. He wasn't searching for someone to replace his wife. He was simply allowing another person to know the woman he had loved. That made all the difference. After a while, Grace asked the question she had been carrying since entering the house. Why did you really ask me? The foundation. Travis shook his head. That was the excuse. She frowned. What do you mean? He stood and slowly walked toward the edge of the lake. The night I found you. I had just finished visiting the neonatal intensive care unit. I always visit alone. Every year. On the same date. Grace realized he was describing the anniversary. The anniversary, Emily died. He nodded. When I walked into the parking lot, I saw a pregnant woman standing in the rain. You weren't protecting yourself. You were protecting a pair of baby shoes. He smiled sadly. And all I could think was, Emily would have done exactly the same thing. Grace lowered her eyes. I didn't ask you to marry me because I needed someone. I asked because... He paused, struggling for words. Because I suddenly remembered the last promise I never kept. She waited quietly. The nurse repeated Emily's final words to me. Tell him no mother should ever feel alone. His voice cracked for the first time. I spent 10 years donating money, building hospitals, funding programs. I convinced myself I was honoring her. He shook his head slowly. But standing in that parking lot, I realized I had walked past the very person Emily had asked me never to ignore. Grace felt tears filling her eyes. So you weren't trying to rescue me? No. I was trying to become the man my wife believed I already was. Neither of them noticed tears anymore. They simply sat with the truth. Grace reached into her coat pocket and removed the handwritten letter Travis had given her. I've read this 6 times. He smiled. I only wrote 1 copy. She laughed softly. I know. She carefully unfolded it again. You know what convinced me? The promises. She shook her head. No. She pointed to 1 line. You wrote, "You may disagree with me." He nodded. I did. No one who wants to control someone writes that. Those words settled gently between them. Just then, Margaret appeared from the house. She stopped several yards away. I'm sorry to interrupt. What is it? Travis asked. A reporter is at the front gate. Travis sighed quietly. So it begins. Margaret continued. He somehow learned about the marriage license. Grace's expression tightened. I don't want your reputation damaged because of me. Travis looked at her with calm certainty. My reputation isn't damaged by marrying a woman with dignity. It's damaged if I ever become a man without it. An hour later, a black SUV waited outside the estate gates. Several news vans had already gathered. Camera crews adjusted microphones. Photographers watched every movement. Grace froze when she saw them. "I can't do this." "You don't have to. They'll ask questions. Then answer only the ones you want. What if they ask about Derek? Then don't answer. What if they ask why you married me?" Travis opened the passenger door for her. He smiled gently. "Then I'll answer that one." Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she climbed into the car. As the gates slowly opened, camera flashes exploded like lightning. Neither of them realized that the next 5 minutes would transform public opinion and their own understanding of what this marriage had quietly become. The first camera flash exploded before Travis had taken 3 steps beyond the front gate. Reporters called his name from every direction. "Mr. Reed, is this a publicity marriage? Did you secretly remarry? Is the woman beside you expecting your child?" Grace instinctively stopped walking. Only a week earlier, strangers had looked at her with suspicion. Now they looked at her with curiosity. Neither felt comfortable. Travis noticed her shoulders tense. Without saying a word, he slowed his pace until they were walking side by side. Not in front of one another. Not behind one another. Beside each other. A reporter pushed forward. "Mr. Reed, why marry someone you've only known for a few days?" Another voice followed immediately. "Is she receiving money for this marriage?" A third shouted over the others. "Did you rescue her from homelessness?" Grace lowered her eyes. She could almost feel every label being placed on her before anyone knew her name. Homeless, pregnant, gold digger, victim. Travis raised one hand politely. "I'll answer one question." The crowd fell unusually quiet. He looked toward Grace first. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to." "I know." Only after hearing her answer did he face the microphones. "You asked why I married Grace." He paused. "The answer is very simple. I married a woman whose character impressed me long before I knew anything about her circumstances." The reporters exchanged glances. Someone asked, "Are you saying her homelessness didn't matter?" "It mattered." Travis answered honestly. "It mattered because no woman expecting a child should have to sleep without knowing where she'll be safe." "But homelessness doesn't define character." He looked directly into one camera. "I've met wealthy people I wouldn't trust with $5. I've met people with almost nothing whom I'd trust with my life." Another reporter quickly asked, "Did you save her?" Before Travis could respond, Grace quietly spoke. "No." Every microphone turned toward her. She took a slow breath. "He didn't save me. He offered me a chance to stand back up. Those aren't the same thing." Silence settled across the gathering. Grace continued, "I still have to make my own choices. I still have to become the kind of mother my daughter deserves." "No amount of money can do that for me." One young reporter lowered her microphone. There was no scandal in front of her. Only honesty. Another journalist asked softly, "Mrs. Reed?" Grace smiled awkwardly at hearing the new name. "Sir, what convinced you to trust him?" She thought for a moment. "The first question he ever asked me wasn't, 'Who's the baby's father?' It wasn't, 'What did you do wrong?'" She looked toward Travis. "He asked me when I'd last eaten." The crowd became quiet again. No dramatic headline could compete with such a simple answer. Travis opened the car door. "I think that's enough for today." No one argued. The drive home passed mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Peaceful silence. Grace looked out the window. "I wasn't planning to speak." "I'm glad you did." "I surprised myself." "You surprised them too." She laughed softly. "I think I surprised the reporters most." "You probably ruined several headlines." Good. When they returned to the estate, Margaret was waiting with warm apple cider. I saw everything on television. Grace looked alarmed. It was already on TV. It spread quickly. Margaret smiled, but not the way people expected. Daniel arrived less than an hour later carrying his tablet. You should see this. Neither Travis nor Grace enjoyed reading articles about themselves. Still, Daniel insisted. The first headline read, "Billionaire says character matters more than circumstances." The second, pregnant woman rejects rescue narrative during first public appearance. Another article simply quoted Grace's words, "He offered me a chance to stand back up." Comments poured in beneath every story. Many criticized, many doubted, but thousands shared personal experiences. Single mothers, veterans, former foster children, people who had once been homeless. They weren't discussing Travis's fortune. They were discussing dignity. Grace slowly set the tablet aside. I never wanted attention. You didn't ask for it. Daniel smiled. But perhaps someone needed to hear what you said. That evening, as sunset painted the lake golden, the house phone rang. Margaret answered. A few moments later, she looked toward Grace. It's Dr. Foster. Grace hurried to the phone. Hello. The doctor's cheerful voice filled the line. I just wanted to check on you. I'm doing well. I also wanted to tell you something. What is it? You've inspired someone. Grace looked confused. A young woman came to the clinic this afternoon. She almost left without being examined because she couldn't pay. Grace listened quietly. When she saw your interview playing on the waiting room television, Dr. Foster paused. She decided to stay. She told me if another pregnant woman could ask for help without losing her dignity, then maybe she could too. Grace closed her eyes. After ending the call, she remained standing beside the window. Travis approached. Everything all right? She nodded. I thought kindness always moved one person at a time. He smiled. Sometimes it does. And sometimes it echoes. A week passed peacefully. For the first time in many months, Grace developed ordinary routines. She accompanied Margaret to a neighborhood farmer's market every Saturday morning. She learned every employee's name. She insisted on folding her own laundry. She volunteered twice a week at the church maternity shelter where she had briefly stayed. Whenever someone thanked her for donating supplies, she quietly corrected them. I didn't donate. I just brought back what someone once gave me. One afternoon, while organizing baby clothes at the shelter, Grace noticed a frightened young woman sitting alone in a corner. She couldn't have been older than 19. She clutched a small plastic grocery bag containing everything she owned. No family, no friends, no idea where to begin. The image felt painfully familiar. Grace walked over carrying a small cardboard box. Inside rested a brand new pair of yellow baby shoes. The young woman looked confused. I can't pay for these. Grace smiled. I know. They aren't payment. They're a promise. What promise? Grace gently placed the little shoes into her hands. That today isn't the end of your story. Tears filled the young woman's eyes. She hugged the box tightly, exactly as Grace once had in a rain-soaked hospital parking lot. Watching from across the room, Travis felt something shift inside him. Emily's final words returned once again. No mother should ever feel alone. For the first time in 10 years, those words no longer sounded like a burden he had failed to carry. They sounded like a promise that had finally found its way home. As they walked out of the shelter together that evening, Grace reached for Travis's hand without thinking. She noticed it only after their fingers had already intertwined. She looked up slightly embarrassed. I'm sorry. Travis gently tightened his hand around hers. Don't be. Neither of them said another word. Some moments became more meaningful when left unspoken, and somewhere between a cardboard box, a pair of yellow baby shoes, and two wounded hearts that had finally stopped running from the past. Their marriage quietly ceased being an agreement, without either of them noticing exactly when it had become a family. 1 year later, the first thing visitors noticed wasn't the building. It was the shelf beside the entrance. Lined neatly across polished oak were dozens of tiny pairs of yellow baby shoes. Some were brand new. Some had been handmade. Some carried handwritten notes tucked inside. Each pair represented one mother who had arrived believing she had nowhere left to go. Above the shelf hung a simple wooden sign. Yellow Shoes Project. No corporate logo, no photograph of Travis Reed. No mention of Reed Biotech, only one sentence carved into the wood. Every child deserves a beginning. Every mother deserves someone who believes in her. Grace stood just inside the entrance, adjusting the sleeve of a young volunteer whose name tag kept slipping sideways. Motherhood had softened her without making her weaker. Hope was now 11 months old, laughing from a playpen in the corner of the community room while stacking colorful wooden blocks. Whenever one tower collapsed, she clapped instead of crying. Grace smiled every time she heard it. Children, she had learned, often taught adults how to begin again. The building itself had once been an abandoned neighborhood community center on Chicago's South Side. Instead of demolishing it, Travis had quietly purchased the property and renovated it. Grace refused to let it become another place where people simply received charity. She wanted something different. Every woman who entered the program would leave with more than temporary shelter. They would receive prenatal care, financial counseling, job training, childcare assistance, legal support, interview coaching. Most importantly, they would leave with work confidence and a plan. Grace insisted on one rule. No one would ever be asked what mistake had brought them there before being offered a meal. The kitchen always came first. Questions could wait. That policy became known among volunteers as Grace's rule. Few of them knew where it had come from. Every Thursday afternoon, Grace personally cooked a large pot of chicken noodle soup. The recipe wasn't extraordinary. The meaning behind it was. Whenever new residents asked why the soup was always served first, Grace answered with the same gentle smile. Because good decisions are easier on a full stomach. The volunteers repeated the phrase so often that it eventually became part of the orientation handbook. Across town, reporters occasionally described the Yellow Shoes Project as Travis Reed's newest charitable initiative. Every time he read those articles, he quietly asked for one correction. Please credit the founder correctly. The founder is Grace Reed. He refused interviews about the center. He refused naming rights. He even declined requests to place his family's name on the building. This place doesn't belong to me, he told Daniel one afternoon. It belongs to the women who walk out stronger than they walked in. Daniel smiled. Emily would have liked that answer. Travis looked toward the children's playroom, where Hope had just learned to take 3 wobbly steps before falling into Margaret's waiting arms. I hope so. Margaret had officially retired months earlier. Unofficially, she spent nearly every afternoon at the center. Every child called her Grandma Margaret. She never corrected them. One crisp Saturday morning, Grace was organizing donated baby blankets when a volunteer approached. There's someone asking for you. Grace walked toward the reception area. A young woman stood nervously near the entrance. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her coat was thin. Her backpack looked worn. In one hand, she carried a plastic grocery bag. In the other, a cardboard box. Grace's heartbeat slowed. The young woman looked embarrassed. I don't know if I'm in the right place. You are. I heard, she hesitated, that people here don't judge. Grace smiled warmly. We try not to. The young woman carefully opened the cardboard box. Inside rested a tiny pair of faded pink baby socks. They're all I bought. I don't even know if I'll be able to keep them clean. Grace looked at the socks for several quiet seconds. Then she glanced toward the shelf filled with yellow shoes. I'd like to show you something. She led the young woman to the entrance display. One pair of shoes sat inside a small glass case. Older than the others, more worn. A handwritten card rested beside them. The first pair. The beginning of everything. The young woman looked confused. Were these your daughters? Grace nodded. I bought them when I had almost nothing. I thought they were the only thing I could give her. What changed? Grace smiled through eyes beginning to glisten. I discovered that hope grows faster when someone shares it. Behind them, Hope toddled across the hallway holding a picture book almost as large as she was. She laughed when she spotted Travis walking through the front doors. Dada! The word echoed across the building. Travis bent down, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. He kissed the top of her curly hair before carrying her toward Grace. There had never been a formal conversation about titles. No one had asked Hope to call him anything. Children often chose with their hearts long before adults found the right words. Grace watched them together. A year earlier, she had promised herself never to mistake rescue for love. Today, she understood something deeper. Love wasn't built from dramatic promises. It was built from ordinary mornings, shared meals, doctor appointments, sleepless nights with a crying baby, budget spreadsheets spread across the kitchen table, holding hands without noticing, showing up again tomorrow, and the day after that. Later that afternoon, after the last volunteer had gone home, Grace and Travis locked the front doors together. The autumn sun hung low over the neighborhood. Before leaving, Grace straightened one pair of yellow shoes that had shifted slightly on the shelf. Travis watched her with a familiar smile. You still make sure they're perfectly lined up. They remind me where we started. He reached into his coat pocket. I've been carrying something. He unfolded a small piece of paper worn from years inside an old cedar chest. It was one of Emily's handwritten notes. You are enough. Travis looked at it for a moment, then gently placed it beneath the glass case, holding Grace's original yellow shoes. Grace looked at him quietly. Are you sure? He nodded. For years I thought holding on meant never letting go. He slipped his hand into hers. Now I know the best way to honor the people we love. He looked around the center, filled with laughter that still seemed to echo through the empty halls. Is to keep their kindness moving. Grace rested her head gently against his shoulder. Outside, another young mother was walking toward the building carrying everything she owned inside one worn backpack. She paused when she saw the sign. Every child deserves a beginning. Every mother deserves someone who believes in her. Then she stepped through the doors. Exactly 1 year earlier, Grace had stood in the rain protecting a pair of yellow baby shoes because they represented the only future she could still imagine. Now those same shoes welcomed strangers into a place where hope no longer belonged to just one family. It belonged to everyone willing to pass it on. Life rarely changes because one wealthy person writes a check. Money can buy time shelter medicine or opportunity, but it cannot replace compassion, trust, or courage. Real transformation begins when someone chooses to see the human being behind the struggle. Grace was never defined by homelessness. Travis was never healed by wealth. Their lives changed because one person asked, "Have you eaten?" before asking for an explanation, and another person found the courage to accept help without surrendering her dignity. Kindness became meaningful because it respected freedom instead of demanding gratitude. Many people carry invisible burdens. Some hide them behind expensive suits. Others hide them inside worn backpacks or cardboard boxes. We may never know what someone has survived before they cross our path. A gentle word, a warm meal, or a few moments of genuine respect can become the turning point in a life we know nothing about. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: When kindness is received with gratitude and passed forward with humility, it never ends with one person. It becomes a circle of hope that reaches families, communities, and generations yet to come. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments where you're watching from, and what part of Grace and Travis's journey stayed with you the most. If you believe compassion still has the power to change lives, please share this story with someone who needs a reminder that hope can begin in the smallest moments. And if you'd like to hear more stories about courage, second chances, and the quiet strength of ordinary people, we'd be honored to have you subscribe and join us again.